This is the final word story time 239, brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. Adam Collins with you in London, Jeff Lemon with me in Lisbon. One of us will be in Australia, in Melbourne, a couple of weekends from now, because as you can probably tell, if you're watching on YouTube or watching the social media clips, I'm still decked out in my Hawthorn kit after a most commanding semi-final win to knock out Adelaide in straight sets. Can't quite fathom how easy that was in the final term, which means that Hawthorn play Geelong next Friday night. There'll be 100,000 people at the MCG. Jeff's Cats, my Hawks, and then whoever wins out of that will be booking flights to Melbourne for the Cricket Ground Grand Final the following Saturday. Bloody hell, Jeff, it's happening again. Hawthorn Geelong, pointy end of September. Fuck me.
I know. I don't look. I know this is exciting. I know it's a thing, but I just don't. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. It makes me feel vaguely ill.
I know. Tell me about it.
I don't know. There's something about the relationship between those two teams that is one of those things that somebody should write the book on it. It should exist in its own right, but
should be the sequel to Tony Wilson's book about the 1989 Grand Final, which he released at the start of the pandemic. The Great Grand Final. You're right. Tony should write like what happens from 89 through to, I guess, 2008, with a couple of interesting bits in between, and then from 08 to 13 and from 13 to now, and of course playing off in a prelim in 2025 with not the same teams necessarily, but I guess the culture that's been cultivated under the groups that came before them. And one of those teams will remarkably be playing in the granny. I can't fathom how we're there, but Joe Newcomb's played 4 finals. He's best on 4 times. In the absence of our best player, Will Day's not played since. I mean, a couple of games in the middle of the year, but our best player has not been available for the vast majority of the season. Players like Jack Scrimshaw, who had massive doubts on him at the start of last year. He's been crucial in both finals. Josh Ward didn't have a spot in the 23 at different points last year and at the start of this year. Dominant tonight. You can see why Zach Merritt wants to come to Hawthorn. A mate of the show, Sam Brannigan, was driving past a cafe yesterday and saw Zach Merritt out the front. He rolled down the window and goes, "Hey, Zach, calm the Hawks." And Zach gave him a thumbs up and a big smile. So I think I got a fairly good idea as to where he wants to come next year. After both Hawthorn and Merritt's group both briefed the media relentlessly about their, air quotes, private meeting the other day. So I thought we'd get done by a kick tonight. But I suppose we'll save that to next week when Geelong break our hearts. But we can dare to dream for the next 7 days. And as I said, one of us is going to be back in Melbourne, which is faintly ridiculous, but that's the way it works. That's the way these things work. That's family.
Some things you just have to do one way or another. But we have to make a show about cricket. So that's what we're going to do, Adam. This is what we are going to do. We've got story time. We've got a window in which we've got to do it.
We do.
Let's rip into it. It is via the medium of Nerd Pledge, the game that we play with the nice people on the internet who fund this program and the entire Final Word Extended Universe by going to patreon.com/thefinalword, signing up with a number that is not a round number, but is a specific number that relates to cricket in some way, and then challenging us to figure out what the number means.
Yes, we open up with Richard Jansz-Moore, great mate of the show as well. He's been part of those Final Word 11s over the journey, one of which is playing on the 19th, a week from now, as our recording session is today against ODB. Rich Jansz-Moore, 158. Which is very kind of him, in Australian dollars, which is interesting given that Rich lives over here. Historically, his pledges have been very Northants related, so we'll keep that in mind as we go through the clue. All right, ignore the currency. I wasn't feeling rich enough for GBP. This is not to do with Northants, although sadly some who represented Northants as player or coach are involved. In an ideal world, the number would be £0, and it's an indictment on the England cricket team that it's not. Though, had it been £0, we'd have missed out on some iconic cricketing moments of the 80s and 90s, including one of the greatest innings and one of the greatest wickets. The number is a sum of 31 numbers, though 8 of them are 0. A sum of 13 numbers if you want to be pedantic. For more complication, I've doubled one of the 31 numbers to highlight its egregiousness. Many other associated numbers should probably be 0 as well. My brief research suggests 8, though not the only dodginess represented here. 2 brackets more than the number of women, close brackets, and far too many who contributed to influence within ECB over subsequent years. Hopefully there's enough in the clue for you to come in off the long run on this subject. Bloody hell.
Yes.
Okay. Go for it. I'm sure there's enough there for you to have worked it out quite quickly because, as is often the case, the more detailed the clue, the easier it is for us to find something. And there was obviously plenty there. Thank you, Rich.
Yes, well, working out the general gist was quite quickly because I thought this sounds to me like rebel tourists, and then I asked Richard, "Is this about rebel tourists?" And he said yes. So that was fine.
Handy.
The numbers took some more figuring out. The detective group was onto it, and there's a fair bit going on numerically here, but we'll come to the numbers in a minute. This was interesting timing because I was communicating with Rich in the week that Derek Underwood died, and Derek Underwood is part of this story, just one part of this story. So if we back through a point that Sean McGivern made, who's involved in our Nerd Pledge sleuthing, is that even the name Rebel Tours and Rebel Tourists is a bit cute. It's a bit nice when it's a euphemism, essentially, for breaking a ban that was in position against the incredibly oppressive, violent, racist regime in South Africa at the time. And rebels sound cool. People want to be rebels. There are sports teams are called rebels. The Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. In Star Wars, the rebels are the good guys. Rebels are, and in a lot of reporting, in a lot of news reporting, if they say insurgents, that means they're bad. If they say rebels, that generally means they're good. Except for the Houthis. I don't know if the Houthi rebels fit into the general rebel category there.
I am most reluctant to offer a view on that.
Sure. So the way you could frame it, as Sean suggested, is in labour terms, this was a strike. A strike was, and it wasn't a strike for the pay or conditions of those striking, but in solidarity with other people. And if you break a strike, you're a scab. So really, they should be the scab tours, and they should be the scab tourists. I think that would be, which is not to say that somebody has to be tarred with it for the rest of their lives, that they're a terrible person, but you can still cop the fact that you did a terrible thing, and if you're part of a scab tour, then that might not be an unreasonable way to look at it. So I'm going to roll with that for this answer. These will be the scab tours rather than the rebel tours because it sounds kind of less cool. But I thought we should go into some detail about origins, Adam, because we kind of did last week. You had the Alan Hurst answer, and we talked about the Wanderers team that went to South Africa in the 70s.
International teams that were comprised before the was it the Glen Eagles agreement or whatever it was, which changed the framework in 1976.
Yeah, which made it more black and white. So there are 7 defined, what I'm calling today the scab tours, which were all in the 1980s. There are 2 England tours. There's a Sri Lankan tour. There are 2 Australian tours. There are 2 West Indies tours. They all received a lot of criticism, a lot of blowback, but the teams involving players of colour, the Sri Lankan teams and the West Indies teams, got much heavier blowback at home. The Sri Lankan players were banned for like 30 years or something. Those bans were later reduced, but none of them ever played for Sri Lanka again. The West Indies players suffered huge cultural, social rejection. Ash Gray's book, The Unforgiven, does a lot of detail on their stories and what happened to them after those tours. And it was less so for the English and the Australian teams and players, where it's still something associated with those players, but it hasn't stopped most of them from going on to have pretty comfortable and often influential lives and careers. So the tours in the 70s, though, don't have the same weight or the same opprobrium attached to them, which I guess is partly timing in that they happened earlier in proceedings, and partly that they were put together as private tours, or they were sold as private tours, as in, here's somebody who's backing this tour. Maybe it was seen as a money-making enterprise rather than being tours that were put together and backed and funded by South African authorities themselves to try to improve their social standing. So I figured, and feel free to jump in wherever to add some context, because I know this is something that you've read a lot about as well. But so that people can get an idea, because I think even when I look at this subject, I get a bit muddled with the order of things, and I thought I'd run through it quickly so that people listening can try to get it straight in their heads. So you basically start with the Olympics. It's 1964, I think, when South Africa are prohibited from going to the Olympics because they want to pick an all-white team, and that's rejected by the IOC. 1968 is the Basil d'Oliveira affair, when England want to pick a player of colour who's a former South African player who's moved to England, and the South Africans refuse to host them if they do. But Australia still go to South Africa after this, which is interesting. 1969-70, that's Bill Laurie's team, isn't it?
Yep.
So there's not a unified front on this, essentially. New Zealand is still hosting South Africa for rugby trips. There's, and even into the 70s, so 75, 76, an Australian team is supposed to go to South Africa again. And it's only really the intervention of the Gough Whitlam government that suggests very strongly that they shouldn't, and points out that teams like India and West Indies would refuse to play Australia if Australia played South Africa. So, but they were going to go. The intention from the pretty conservative, very white-run Australian cricket establishment was that it was still okay to send a national team in 75, 76, whereas it's countries like India, Pakistan, West Indies who are taking it more seriously than New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah, it's pretty clear to me, like reading through this and interpreting, I guess, the secondary sources, because a lot of it's like people writing about stuff that they weren't necessarily there for. But it was considered far more grey area in the 70s and not grey area in the 80s. I mean, that's really hard and fast way of seeing it. But when it happened in the early 70s, what was going on there? There was a lack of information. It wasn't the world that we live in today, where everything's I don't know, delivered straight to our eyes through our phones instantaneously. There was lots of reporting, of course, but it wasn't entirely clear what was the right thing to do as athletes. And that extends to other protest movements of the time, the Moscow Olympics most famously, where athletes were it was their job to do the thing that got them paid to do the thing they did, or to excel in that, not to become diplomats, if you like. And that's where I think early days there was this fundamental confusion, which was well and truly cleared up by the time we reached the era that you're about to speak about. That's my sense of things anyway.
Well, it's also worth remembering this is still early 70s. This is still the era of white Australia policy. There is broadly, in a white majority country like Australia or like New Zealand, where even an Indigenous population that's very much a minority is something that white people are freaking out about and getting panicky about, or having migrants who are not white is something that white people are extremely anxious about. You can imagine someone in that scenario looking at South Africa, and the expectation would be that a white-run country would be a better thing, even though that's completely anathema to the way that we see the world.
Yeah, that's right. Information deficit, big time there. White Australia was rescinded in 1968, wasn't it? But you're right. The people who were making the era of, that's right. They and indeed, I mean, Whitlam's trip to China is around the same time as this, isn't it? So that opens up Australia to a different conversation there, and one that historically had been shunned in various ways, going back to federations and before. As the decade matured and as they got deeper into it, the politics of this became more and more clear to those who were making these decisions, who are athletes more than just administrators.
Yeah, and I'm not defending that, saying, oh, that was just the style of the time. You know, you have to, well, you can't judge things by today's standards. I think you can and should judge things by those standards, because a lot of people knew that this was bullshit at the time and said so. My point is that there were a lot of people who disagreed with that point of view very strongly, and there are probably fewer now, although that's not entirely sure the way that things are trending at the moment. In any case, it's that 70s period when you've got this really high-profile team that goes, this Wanderers team in 1976. They have a few commercial teams under the D.H. Robbins 11, who's an English former first-class cricketer, businessman who funds teams to go over 3 or 4 different tours through the earlier 70s. It's the Wanderers team that's the really high-profile one. Richie Benaud's running it. Both of the Chappell brothers go. Dennis Lilly goes. Ashley Mallett, Gary Gilmore, Superman Martin Kent, Max Walker, like really good players. And Glenn Turner is on that tour, as we mentioned, which was something that sort of came up in the interview we did with him, but I wasn't really across it, so I didn't have the prep to push him with more questions on that, because it's something that had passed me by that he was part of this tour. But the basic position then was that they were professional cricketers. This was a paid gig, so they went and did it. And I don't know how much they knew about the reality of the situation in South Africa, but it's a reality that becomes much more clear, as we talked about last week, with the Soweto uprising, when the government's enforcing Afrikaans as a language to be taught in schools, and there's an uprising, a student strike against this. Thousands of students protest against having to learn in Afrikaans. Hundreds of them are killed by the police, who start shooting at crowds of protesters. Images emerge of students who've been killed, kids who've been shot. And this is where the true picture of just how repressive and how violently repressive that regime is published in newspapers in the Western world. And that's when things turn.
would I be right in remembering that's the Soweto Uprising is just before the 76 Olympics as well, which is where that intersects with what we were talking about last week, where, there's the Olympic movement can often be the Olympic Games themselves can be a way to highlight injustice or highlight atrocities that are happening around the world, because it's inherently a political event, right? So the fact that it came in such close proximity to the Olympic Games surely helps with the dissemination of the information.
Yeah, drawing attention to everything that was going on. So the boycott is absolute from 76 through to 81, 82. So it lasts for that 5 or 6 year period. And that's when you've got the South African Cricket Association, which runs white cricket, which then sort of gets not superseded, but they redevelop a body which is the South African Cricket Union, so the SACU rather than SACA, which notionally covers mixed cricket with like multiracial cricket, but most players of colour aren't playing ball with that league. But this is the unions deciding that they need international tours, and they're willing to offer big money. They claim that it's private. They claim it's coming from private businesses. They badge the team as the South African Breweries 11, but it turns out it is government funded indirectly, because they give all of those brewery sponsors get massive tax breaks that make back the money that they have to shell out to try to bribe a team to come. And the team that they bribe to come is an England team. Graham Gooch is the captain of that team. There's a dozen of them who are reported in the papers, and after a line in Parliament and called the Dirty Dozen. And their line, as Gooch said when we interviewed him, is that, again, we're professionals doing a job. We got asked to go and play, so we played. The money is a big part of it. They're being offered between £40,000 and £60,000 in early 80s money, which is a lot of cash. 5 years before that, a test match fee for an England player was £200. So you're being offered 300 times what you would have made to play a test match to go on tour for a month. There are various amounts of spin that's given to the players. So Dennis Amos said that they were told that it'd be a development tour and they'd be doing coaching clinics for kids, and they'd be multiracial clinics, and that they'd be making a positive difference. So how much they bought into that, I'm not sure. And there's also the citation that the England authorities were a complete debacle, both in 81, 82 when the first team went, and in 89 when that disastrous Ashes tour was playing out. They picked 29 players across the tour. Earlier in the 80s, there was dissatisfaction with how boring the schedule was, the draws, the endless draws, that tour of India that had so many England players disillusioned. So those are some of the reasons that they give, but the money didn't hurt, basically. That amount of cash being thrown at them, that was, I mean, presumably more than World Series cricket would even have offered, and not many England players got invited to be part of that.
Yeah, I think that there is. I was going to say the same thing when there'd been an example only a couple of years earlier where there had been discord for taking money to go elsewhere. I think that at the time players would have seen this in a similar way. Oh, right, this is a non-sanctioned thing, but we're being paid so well. It's just like World Series cricket. We will do it, and then everything will be fine afterwards. When, of course, I mean, it was to an extent, but in the short term, they had to see out bans, whereas the World Series cricketers, there was that accord with, well, the book that Dan Brady wrote a few years ago now, which meant there weren't anything like that. They basically shook hands and moved on, whereas that was not, strictly speaking, able to happen here. Although the bans, as I'm sure you're going to go through here, were not applied in the same way to each of the tours.
Very different ethical considerations, of course, between World Series cricket and between this. But you hear from players who are essentially trying to frame it as in that they saw it in the same way. Ian Botham tries to sell it that it was an ethical decision that he decided not to go, but he had to get talked out of it. He had agreed to go, and his lawyer flew to India during the India tour to beg him not to do it, basically, or to explain to him why it would be a terrible idea. David Gower was initially down to go and later pulled out. The Dirty Dozen, as they were, became those 12 players who went, and then it was maybe even a bigger story in 1989 because it's mid-Ashes when the story breaks. Mike Gadding's the leader this time around. Having seen what happened in 1982, it's maybe more mystifying. So each of these tours, the players get a 3-year ban, and this is where we come back to Richard's numbers. So he said 158 was the number, which was a sum of 31 numbers, 18 of which was zero. Across the 2 scab tours, you've got 31 players. So there's our sum of 31. The best guess was that we're looking at how many test matches they played after going on one of these tours. So 1982, Jeff Humpage, one of Daniel Norcross's favourites, is the only one who never played a test in his career, played 3 ODIs, didn't play a test before or after. The rest of that squad are mostly near the end of their careers, like Jeff Boycott and Dennis Amos weren't likely to play more test cricket after that probably, but never played again. And then you've got Alan Knott, the wicketkeeper. You've got Bob Woolmer, a couple of seamers in Mike Hendrick and Chris Old, the spinner in Derek Underwood. Never played a test after the 82 tour. Arnie Sidebottom, Les Taylor were uncapped for England at the time, and after their bans, they each played a test or two. You had J.K. Lever, who'd played a fair bit of test cricket, 20 tests before the tour and only played one after it. Peter Woolley wasn't in the side on that India tour and maybe thought that he'd been sidelined and that was part of the motivation to go, but eventually came back and played 6 more tests after his ban. Wayne Larkins played 7 more a long time later by the time he got back in. So 10 of the players, you've got 17 matches that they play after the ban, but that squad also has Embury. John Embury plays 38 tests after his ban, and Graham Gooch played 76. So the 2 players who were still in the prime of their careers when they agreed to go basically were considered good enough to be brought back. Mm-hmm. The 1989 squad is even more sort of players at the end of the road. So they've all but one played a bit of test cricket. Most of them haven't played a lot, but Bill Athey, Tom Graveney, Tim Robinson, Chris Broad, Graham Dilley, Bruce French, Kim Barnett, Richard Ellison, Greg Thomas, none of them ever played again for England after the 89 Scab Tour. So that was 9 of the 16 in that squad. You've got Alan Wells, who was the only uncapped player before the 89 tour. He played his only test after his ban.
Yeah, famously plays that one test match at the Oval. Felix White writes about it emotionally in his book about having apologising. Well, it wasn't a pair. I think it was the first innings he got out 3 or something. Yes. Whatever it was, the first innings when he apologised into the TV cameras when he's leaving the field or something along those lines, which stands out. But yeah, that's the story of Alan Wells, who had the one opportunity and wasn't able to seize it many years later.
Yeah, not the Scottish sprinter, as per a story we told about him an earlier time. There's Neil Foster, who played a bunch before but played 1 test after the 89 tour. Paul Jarvis and Matthew Maynard played 3 tests after that tour. Gadding played 11, including Old Trafford. And Richard mentioned one of the great deliveries, so that'd be the Shane Warne ball to Gadding at Old Trafford. Wouldn't have happened if Gadding wasn't allowed to come back and play afterwards. And I suppose the great innings would be Gooch's 333.
Or his Gooch's great innings was either the 333 or the innings at Leeds, the 154 at Leeds in 1991 against the Windies, which for a long time was considered the best test innings of the modern era until Stokes came along. At least the great test innings for England against the bowling that he was facing, against the conditions he was in. All those things wound up together in the second innings there, which led towards a famous win.
So Gadding 11 tests after that tour. Embury plays 4 tests after the 89 tour. And if we add all of those tests played up, we get to 154. We need 158. But there was the line from Richard that says, for more complication, I've doubled one of the numbers to highlight its egregiousness. That's because Embury, you would have heard correctly if you were listening closely, is the only name that comes up twice. He goes in 82. And he goes in 89.
He's the only one who plays test cricket after going twice. Others went twice, I think, but he's the only one
he's the only one who's on both tours.
Oh, really? I'm surprised by that. Yeah. Okay, there you go. I just took it as read that there would have been others who made 2 trips.
No, because so many in 82 were near the end anyway.
No, you're right. It makes sense. It's just I just kind of thought there'd be some, but I suppose the blowback from those in 82 was such that it would be taking a fairly strident personality, and John Embury is nothing but strident.
4 more tests after the 89 tour. So if you double that to 8, you get 158 caps handed out after players had been on those tours. I suppose you can look at it and say, well, in a way it's fair enough. You know, the ban is the ban. If you get banned for 3 years, you get banned for 3 years, and you're not banned for 10 years or whatever it is. If you wanted players to not be picked again, then they should have been banned for longer. I would imagine the stronger part of what Richard is objecting to is there's a lack of meaningful reflection from most of the figures involved and the way that they were absorbed back into the cricket establishment without much protest, and certainly the way things have panned out today. So you've got Tom Graveney, who was a long-time selector. Chris Broad was a match referee. Bob Woolmer, highly celebrated, especially as coach of South Africa after readmission. A lot of other players coached. Tim Robinson and Peter Woolley were both test umpires. Dennis Amos was on the ECB board. Richard's clue mentioned a number that was 2, and he said more than women, and a number that was 8, which involved some other dodginess. So 2 would be Gatting and Underwood were both MCC presidents. Claire Connor's the only woman who's been president of the MCC. And 8, I surmised, would be royal honours. So if you, even before Boycott's knighthood, you got MBEs for Boycott, Gatting, Gooch, Knott, Amos, Lever and Maynard, while Graveney has an OBE. So there's 8 players. So I think the discomfort for people like Richard is how easily all of that happened. And I think that's why it bothers people still when you look at that apartheid regime and how unambiguous it is about how genuinely awful it was. And then you look at the ethics of, okay, you're a professional player and you got offered some money, but why does someone want you to go there? Why are they offering you that much money? Why are they willing to pay so much? Because they have a shitty reputation and they want to use you to make that reputation better, in the same way as all of the organisations taking the Saudi Arabian royal family's money for various sporting competitions around the world. Again, why are they willing to pay that much? Why are they willing to pay over the odds? Because they have a terrible reputation, and they don't want to change that reputation by changing the things that lead to it. They want to be able to continue to kill and oppress the people who they want to kill and oppress, but they want to change that reputation in another way, and they're happy to use you, the recipient of the money, as a way to try to do that. So that's the very irreconcilable ethical problem at the core of all of this. And I think also that so many of those players are still very bullish about not really being willing to grapple with that ethical problem, not being willing to take it on. There's a lot of resentment about the fact that the story keeps coming up, and to an extent I understand that, because you get sick of talking about the same thing over and over, and there'd be players who say, well, I've been asked about this 1,000 times, why keep going on about it? But particularly when you compare it to what happened to those Sri Lankan players or West Indies players, it's a very different fate that awaited the England players and I guess the Australian players. In the same way, there are a few who've, Gatting and Graveney said it was a mistake to go. Embury said that going in 89 was a mistake, but not in 82. Not sure why that was. Gooch basically says it is what it is. But at least in anything that I've seen or read, I've never seen any of these players really grappling with why it was such a problem and why people were so upset and why some people remain angry about it to this day. I think because those players have never been willing to take it on and to show that they're genuinely trying to understand it. So for some of them, that's too late. Bob Woolmer died a long time ago. Larkins, Underwood, Hendrick, Dilly have all passed away, mostly in the last few years. But most of those players are still around. They still have time to consider their position if they want to, but I'm not exactly holding my breath.
Yeah, I sort of sense, I don't know if remorse is the right word when talking to Gatting about this. When we spoke at Lords for the pod earlier this year, he explained the circumstances behind it, which were that he was, in the end, not keen to do it, but he was. It was reported that he was doing it, and it was the scandal around whether he was going to return to the captaincy from memory, and it all got big on him, and he made a bad call. I think that's how he would interpret it now. But yeah, you're right about the Australians as well. You look back, and there are 2 1989 Australian Ashes tourists in Alderman and Hones who went on that 85-86 trip. And of course, Kim Hughes remains prominent and has remained prominent throughout, and he was the one who led that side. There are a host of others, and Carl Rackerman, of course, played probably his best cricket for Australia. Carl Rackerman came after his ban expired in the late 80s and the early 1990s as well. So yeah, it's clearly an area where it remains not contested space. I think the contention that Rich is expressing is a perfectly reasonable one, and what you've detailed there bolsters it quite well. But also that those who were there at the time were led a bit of a merry dance about what the tour represented, and they swallowed it. That's what it boils down to. Some of them would have had a better sense of it than others, but most of them swallowed it, about it being a chance to help unify and a chance to help grow the game, and all these other bits and bobs that proved to be well, I think it speaks for itself what it was really there for. And the comparison you draw to what we're seeing in modern day sport around Saudi Arabia is a reasonable one. And so it's proved in other regimes and in other at other times where significantly over the odds payments have been submitted to get people to do things which have been in no small part to help. To help.
You always want to ask first, why is someone willing to pay you this much more? And in the case of what was a very easily identified as an inhumane, oppressive, awful regime, that's a pretty easy one to be able to see.
Thank you, Richard Jansz-Moore, for a very generous pledge and for a very thoughtful story there from Jeff to get us going. A quick ad before we go to our break, for which we are late for, so I'll get through this quite quickly. The show's brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. We've had some new documentation sent through from Maurice Blackburn this week, so I've got some interesting stories to tell you about their recent success and also some more in the superannuation insurance space. For instance, the story of Ron, who Maurice Blackburn helped win an $850,000 TPD claim after holding a really difficult insurer to account. His full story is on the Maurice Blackburn blog, which we will put into the show notes so you can read there and see the video of the client story. It's also within that blog. So great if you can sort of see and get a sense of Ron's story there. And I think our audience have been taken on a bit of a journey around super insurance. I certainly have. I didn't know a lot about this till we started talking about it. No. And I think over time we'll get a chance to use Ron's story as an emblem of where this is hardworking Australians who are entitled to certain things where they find it incredibly difficult to access those things at their most difficult times in their life, owing to the attitudes that are taken by some insurers, and Maurice Blackburn being there a lot of the time on a no-win, no-fee basis on their team, on their side. So we'll link Ron's story through into the show notes, and then we will tell that in more detail as we make our way through the next couple of months on the Final Word. This is Story Time. We'll be back in a moment. It's Final Word Story Time, the 239th time we've convened to make our history show. A reminder as well, Jeff, that the NordVPN deal that we've had going for a time now, and it keeps on keeping on. And the reason it keeps going on is because people keep buying it. And why wouldn't you?
Keep signing up.
Why wouldn't you? I had reason to visit my Nord account the other day. I can't remember what it was for anymore, but it was just so bloody easy. It's just, I know what it was actually. I wanted to watch, even though I've got one of those AFL accounts that lets me watch everything on my iPad. I was away, I was on my computer, and I wanted to watch Brad Scott's interview on AFL 360, which I'm entitled to watch legally, so I didn't feel like I was cheating the system. But it was social media clips, like when you're on social media and they geo-block them.
Your region. This content is not enabled for your region.
I really wanted to watch the bit where Brad Scott claimed that Essendon have got the best supporters and everyone should be jealous of Essendon supporters. I'm like, that is too good. I need to hear him say that. I need to watch that with my own two eyes. And so I did. And so I laughed. And that was possible thanks to NordVPN.com/TFW for your very, very generous discount. There's the security component when using public Wi-Fi like I was the other day. There's the servers in, what are we up to now? 111 countries or something ridiculous? 165 countries. That's like more than three quarters. When we started doing this promotion, it was like a third of the world about a bit more than a third of the world. Now it's more than three quarters of the world. So that gives you a sense of the growth of NordVPN. Recently won some big flashbang award as the best VPN in the world, judged by a panel that I can't remember at the moment. But believe me, I saw it on their website. So NordVPN.com/TFW, 30-day money-back guarantee. Not that you'll need it.
Dennis Committee gave him 3 votes.
Yeah. 3 votes. Wayne Jackson, 3 votes. Mark Dragasevich. Yes. It's Brownlow time. Anyway, so that's the thing that we do on the show. If you need your VPN coming into times that you might be traveling, a lot of our Final Word crew are going out to the Women's World Cup, which is absolutely brilliant. They'll need their VPNs.
Don't need
Lara,
tickets.
Yes, that's right. But all of our Final Word guys who are going out there, Mike's going, Lara's going, a bunch of our Final Word team are going out there to follow the tournament and go over to Sri Lanka. They'll need a VPN and they'll know where to get it. NordVPN.com/TFW for your discount.
Right, let us continue. You have a number, Adam. It comes in from Stephen Colvin. This is a new pledge, I believe. It's in the USD. It is $3.50. Greenback, Stephen says, big fan of the show. First-time nerd pledger, welcome. You too could be a first-time nerd pledger. Patron, Patreon.com/the final word. We want to get to 974. We're around 800-ish at the moment. We want 974 so we can beat Don Bradman's record for runs in a series and finally be better than Bradman. Get us along that way in the Ashes. And then you also get the version of the feed without the automated ads dropped in. And you get access to the chat page and a bunch of other fun stuff, as well as having your number on the show and having us try to solve it, which you're going to try to do with Stevens 350. He says, have fun. The only thing is this number is a bit contrived.
Yeah, once again, thanks, Stephen. Not only for being there with us, but also for a good word in contrived that permits one to, there are starting points with the word contrived, right? For instance,
contrived result.
Contrived result. Declarations are often contrived. I initially thought of Hansy.
Leather jacket.
Yeah, I thought contrived. So I took a deep dive into the Centurion test of 2000, nothing doing there, so I moved on from that. Allegations of contrived results in the county championship. There was some of that in the 90s where there were suggestions that one team would do poorly in one format in order for the other team to do well in another, which would suit both teams. Contrived results. That was the allegation made in that era. I'm not going to go into that. I had a look at the cards. None of it married up with 350. I moved on quickly. But what about tons? As it can absolutely pours with rain here. I've got to get Winnie from school in 20 minutes. This is going to be fun. What about centuries and contrived? And here is where I eventually hit the jackpot. Now, it is grey area statistically about the quickest centuries, as we know from our most recent episode in the feed. The Gilbert Jessup fastest England 100 from 1902. Was it 76 balls? Was it 75? Was it somewhere between, as Simon Wilder's sleuthed, 72 to 74? So, which is the assessment that he's come up with, having read contemporaneous reports and ball by ball information that's available at the time. I recommend listening to that chat with Daniel Norcross that we dropped out on Book Club a couple of days ago. Now, I know that fastest century lists often don't include lob bowling in first class, which makes the David Hookes 34 baller all the more remarkable, because there's nothing contrived about that. I've watched the highlights of it many times from 1982, and to think that was done 21 years before T20 is invented is another reminder of what a freakish striker of the ball that David Hookes was. So I thought, knowing that 34 ball thing, I thought, well, it'll be a 35 ball thing. But there is no 35 balls. There's some contrived hundreds. The 27 baller for Glenn Chappell in 1993, Lancs against Glamorgan. 27 balls for Mark Bettini, Essex against Leicestershire 2006. Murray Goodwin, 32 balls. Sussex against Middlesex, also in 2006. Only 3 months between Bettini's and Goodwin's. And Tom Moody's 36 baller, which was Warwickshire against Glamorgan in 1990, which we spoke to Tom about in our live show in Perth last year. Now, by contrived, I mean this is where the fielding team are trying to let the batting team get as many runs as possible, as quickly as possible, so they declare in order to open up the opportunities for a chase, because the more time that they can have, the more likely it is that they'll eventually get to the target in the fourth innings. So that's what we mean by contrived innings where lob bowling has been deployed.
Yeah, so the fielders are staying out of the way, basically, and the bowlers are just looping up the ball to be smashed.
Yeah, and the last time we saw it was on the final day of the 2016 county championship season, when Yorkshire and Middlesex agreed that, well, both teams, a draw, neither of them could win. Somerset would have won the championship. So Yorkshire or Middlesex could only win if one of them won. So they needed to get to the fourth innings, and to get to the car chase, they bowled 8 overs of lob bowling to speed up the third innings declaration to enhance the possibility of a win. And we know what happened there with Toby Rowland-Jones taking a hat trick to complete that game and Middlesex winning the competition. But out of all of that, there are no 35 ballers. There's a 45 baller, the second quickest, which we've spoken about before, Robin Hobbs. We talk about all the time, it seems. Now, that was in 44 minutes, which for a long time was the actual
He was in
measure.
one of the DH Robbins teams that went to South Africa. There you go.
Oh, was he? Didn't know that.
Robin Hobbs.
Most of the coverage of quick hundreds in any era, really, until the last 30 or 40 years, related to how many minutes did you make the runs in. They didn't count the balls in the way that we do now, for whatever reason. I have no idea why on old scorecards they didn't count balls. It makes no sense to me why they didn't bother.
To do.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it's such a straightforward process to account for balls faced by the striker in the score books, but it just wasn't the convention, and it just largely wasn't done. So they can reconstruct scorecards, but which isn't a perfect science. But anyway, so the Robin Hobbs 45 baller, 44 minutes, and that was where I struck gold. So by minutes, Chappell 21 minutes, Patini 24, Goodwin 25, Moody 26. In the bin, all of them. But next, and the real fastest 100 ever, at least that's what we're going to go with, and I'll explain why in a moment, Percy Fender. Now, this was the fastest 100 recorded, and it was done in 1920, and there was no disputing the number of minutes, 35, and there was a ball count done retrospectively, which I'll come to later, but it was always the 35-minute 100, and it overtook the 40-ball 100 that had been made by Gilbert Jessup. So this became number one by 5 minutes. It was in a match between...
Jessup was 40 minutes.
In a first-class game. Different game.
Right.
Different
game.
First-class
40
game
minutes or 40 balls?
40 minutes. So we're going with minutes here. We're going to deal in minutes alone here for the time being. So it's a wild scorecard. It's the penultimate game of Surrey's season. They need to win to have a chance to jump beyond Middlesex. So when Northants batted for 105 overs and made 306, it meant that Surrey had to go bananas. They had to get a lead and they had to manage accordingly. And did they ever? And now a quick diversion here to a chap called Alan Peach. He played 338 first-class matches, most of them for Surrey, had a batting average of 23, just 400s because he was primarily a bowler. But here he makes 200 not out in 190 minutes. He has support from Andy Ducat, who makes 149 in 135 minutes. And then in walks Percy Fender to bat with Peach. At number 7 is Fender, the captain. And he hits 113 not out in 42 minutes with 16 fours and 5 sixes. But the ton, famously, in just 35. They added 171 in 42 minutes, he and Peach. So I mentioned the previous quickest was 40 minutes for a century. That was in 1897 when Jessup was batting for Gloucestershire against Yorkshire. He had the second quickest at the time as well, a 42-minute job, which was 10 years on from that in 1907 when I think he was playing for the Gents of South England or something like that. Right. Just on this, Andrew Sampson was sitting behind the interview with Norcross and Simon Wilde, and what he wanted further exploration of is the first-class record of Jessup, because, of course, there's no strike rates kept from that time because there's no ball-by-ball data. Sampson reckons that across a career where 493 games were played by Jessup, massive sample size, 53 first-class hundreds, Sampson reckons his first-class strike rate was somewhere over 110. So therefore, by an absolute mile, the quickest first-class batter of all time. By a mile. Yeah. So that Sampson thinks
first-class strike rates at that era would be like 30. It'd be like 30 to 40 for most players, probably.
And you'd have outliers for sure. But even if they were 70 or 80 for some of the freaks, the fact that he was striking at 110, which outstrips even what we now get in even the most extravagant players who are multi-format. None of them. I mean, Josh Butler's strike rate in Test cricket's like 55 or something like that. You know what I mean? And that's not criticising Josh. It's just simply that the format of the game doesn't often lend itself to batting that way. But that was the way that Jessup kind of always batted. Back to the game in 1920 with Percy Fender. So Surrey got to 619 for 5 in 110 overs. Then Northants went pretty hard again. They got 430 in 119 overs. So some game this. It left Surrey 120 to get, and they reached it in 36 overs. So obviously over 8s are a lot quicker in these days. Jack Hobbs not out 54 at the end, but they did lose to Middlesex the next week, and Middlesex won the championship. So Surrey stayed in it because of this win, but they were defeated in the final round. Such is life. Just getting into the innings a little bit more. He entered when the lead is 142. Took him 19 minutes to reach 50. 94 of the 113 runs were in boundaries. And in a reconstruction similar to the Jessup one, where people have gone through the ball-by-ball reporting of the time, which was far more sophisticated than we would ever have it these days, they estimate he made it between 40 and 46 balls. So, in the same rough bracket as our 45 baller from Robin Hobbs, but of course Hobbs has took an extra 10 minutes for whatever reason. They were probably looking for the balls that Hobbs was bombing all over the place. And remembering that Hobbs was in a game against the touring Australians, and I don't suppose the Australians were in a hurry, whereas in this format, I guess they were bound to move quickly to maintain an over 8. Anyway, so it stood. there was a little bit of retrospective speculation about the veracity of the 35-minute 100, but no one really ever doubted that it was real and it was a freakish performance. Fast forward to the September of 1983. Lancashire playing Leicestershire, and a 22-year-old by the name of Steve O'Shaughnessy, who we know well for being a top-flight umpire these days. Final day of the season, so apt timing given we're in September in the championship at the moment. Bad weather, which is what we've had in the championship this week as well. A match at Old Trafford where they didn't get on until afternoon 2 due to rain. And then Lancashire made 236 with their first innings ending at some point in the afternoon of the third and final day. It was a 3-day match. Now, there could have been a double declaration here to have set up a chase, akin to the Hansi Cronje double declaration of 2000, but remembering that this wasn't unusual for the second and third innings of matches where it was rain affected to be forfeited in order to facilitate a result.
Just mutual agreement that it's a one-innings game.
That's right. You see that from time to time even now. But they didn't do it because Leicestershire required one batting point to finish fourth, and you only get batting points for the first innings of the match. So they, and I guess there was a financial bonus for finishing in the top four. So they went in and they duly did bat. However, with 3 hours remaining in the game, they declared, hoping that maybe Lancashire might set it up and declare and give themselves a chance of winning. So I'll tell you what, they did give themselves a chance of speeding the game up because Leicestershire, to incentivise Lancashire, bowled David Gower and James Whittaker not long after they started their innings. So the aforementioned Steve O'Shaughnessy, 22-year-old, batting with our old mate Foxy Fowler, and it's a bevy of full tosses and long hops. At one stage, Foxy hits 10 sixes in a row, which remains a record in first-class cricket. 10 sixes consecutively for Foxy Fowler.
Balls.
In his innings. So I guess it was an over. It must have been across 2 or 3 overs, the way that it all played out.
Yeah.
And in the 35 minutes before tea, 190 for 0. There was a short rope. They were fed. And the last ball before tea, O'Shaughnessy cuts Gower for 4, which brings up his even century in that number of minutes from Fender 63 years earlier. 35 minutes. He gives a semi-embarrassed wave of the bat. As O'Shaughnessy said later, my only difficulty was whether to hit the ball for 4 or 6. He had no idea about the record.
That's Jock Cameron's line, isn't it? The South African keeper when he was smashing Headley Verity around. No, Cameron didn't say it, but one of the reporters on the map said it. You know, his only difficulty against Verity was deciding whether to hit him for 4 or 6.
Gosh, that's a blessing to be in that position against Verity, one of the most accurate bowlers to ever play the game. So
I wonder,
this was a little bit different to that.
I wonder if he somehow knew. Like, that's quite a flex from a 22-year-old if he just inherited that line over the years and it had come out.
What would have been a flex had I had the foresight to have texted Gower to send me a voice note about this day, which I regret not doing now. You know what? I'm going to back myself here. Here's David Gower. I'm going to send him a text after we've recorded, and hopefully he writes back and says, I'll drop you a voice note which can pad this out. If he doesn't, that's okay. You'll know I've been unsuccessful. Anyway, so he had no idea about the record. Now, remember all those contrived hundreds I told you about before? They're in 1990, 1993, 2006 times 2. This precedes all of that. This is the first time anyone has hit the 35-minute mark that Fender had. So, he had, on paper at least, equaled the record, and nobody really knew what to do. So the game, Foxy makes 100 as well. They end up getting 214 for 3. Gower takes 102, well, none for 102 from 9 overs of lob. But the furore kind of takes off after. O'Shaughnessy goes back to Old Trafford, remembering it's the last day of the season, to put his kit away for the winter. There's a telegram there from Percy Fender. Congratulations on equaling my 63-year-old record. Signed, Fender. Then he went to visit him 2 days later. He went to his house. Percy Fender's blind by this point. Old man, he's blind. Remembering, the great Surrey captain. I was going through a stat of his this week that he captained Surrey against Warwickshire on 20 separate occasions. Like, this guy was around forever and still going strong. He must have been in his 90s by this point. And there's a nice bit of byplay where he grabs the bat off O'Shaughnessy and says, very nice of you to gift this to me. And O'Shaughnessy's like, okay. He was only joking, but he's like, I would have given him the bat. How was I going to say no? But all taking the piss. Woodcock in the Times said that there should be rules against it. Wisden then came up with the word here, contrived circumstances, where they put it in the almanac in 1984. And I checked this. It's the first edition I have in my collection is 84, being the first year of my life. And there is, O'Shaughnessy sits there with Fender, but with an asterisk saying contrived circumstances. Now, I had a look at 2025's, though. It's vanished. The caveat now reads, 100 scored in contrived circumstances and with bowlers' compliance are excluded, including the fastest of them all in 21 minutes, 27 balls by Chappell. Then it runs through a few more details of Chappell, Patini, Moody, and not Goodwin, interestingly. They leave out Goodwin. So what they've done here is they've put all of the hundreds that happened in 20-something minutes, but they've left out Murray Goodwin now, and they've left out O'Shaughnessy. So the asterisks used to sit in Wisden and used to mention O'Shaughnessy, but he's been taken out by history. So I'm going to lobby Lawrence to have.
They've said we're gonna not include these, and here are the ones we're gonna not include.
Yeah, it's below the fold, if you like. It's in italics underneath the actual chat.
Still included them.
Yeah, so in minutes, it's still got Fender as 1 and Hobbs as 2, right? The number 1 and number 2 by minutes, that is, because they have it by balls as well. But I would just note that there are 200s that probably should be in the italics. I'll ask Lawrence about that, because if it's going to include the other 3, I think at least it should get mentioned in dispatches, if you like, with those. So justice for O'Shaughnessy at some point. Anyway, what happened to him? A couple of years later, he went to Worcestershire and then finished up in the minor counties. In 2011, though, his more significant cricketing career begins as a first-class umpire. One of the best going around. It was his 64th birthday this week, Steve O'Shaughnessy. I'm not sure whether he was standing in this round, but he's done, in this season alone, he's still there at the pointy end of the blast, the 100, the county championship, the one-day cup. His most recent first-class game was his 200th as a standing umpire. That is a record that is not contrived, that nobody can take away from him, in addition to 300 white ball games, 12 women's internationals. It's a great tale of the time that Steve O'Shaughnessy met the great Percy Fender on an unusual 35-minute 100 that they both share in different circumstances. For Stephen, Colvin, thank you for joining in on what we are doing here. That was terrific.
Very good. Get him in. Get him back in the list. Get everybody back in the list, or at least in a separate list. You can't say you're not going to have a list and then list the list that you're not having. We should skip to a break before we get through our last couple of numbers. A reminder that if you haven't checked out the New Brew website to look at the Discovery Pack, that's the easiest way. If you've been listening to us talk about it and going, what is this? What are they talking about? It's a brain supplement, effectively, that is very easy to take because it's in the form of a drink that tastes good. So you get a drink that tastes good as well along the way. People who've been using New Brew are reporting benefits like a reduction in mental fatigue and sharpening up their focus and concentration, their memory retention, energy, mental drive, things like that. So there are people who are finding it useful. You can go and check it out, see what the ingredients are, see what the reporting on that is, and look through the range of products they've got. But what they have is this Discovery Pack, which means that it's a lot cheaper than the other packs, and it's got a bunch of different flavors, different types in it, so you can try them all and figure out what you like before you decide to make a bigger investment. And that's got 15% off as well if you go to Noobrew, noobru.com/TFW.
Final word, story time 239. We have gone into the future since the ad. I have picked up Woody from school. She's on the sofa. I've got a window to finish the show, which is all we require at this point. Jeff, you're going to go first. It's for Mike Kilner, 635. This is an existing pledger. Thank you, Mike, for being with us again. It's in US dollars. The clue is as follows. For Fox's sake, careful how you say it, this Swiss Army knife of a sportsman completed a superb double in 1976. The demands of both means we will surely never see the feat, or should it be that feat, F-E-E-T, repeated, certainly in England. Right, there you go. Feat, Swiss Army knife, capital S, capital A, superb double, 1976. Fox's sake. They're again, I loved all 3 clues today. All of them have enabled us to actually answer the bloody question. Go for it, Jeff.
And thank you, Mike, for being patient. Because Mike originally signed up as a Julio pledger, which is when you come in with your 2 or your 5 or your 10 or your 20, and it doesn't actually have a story attached. But then changed it up to a nerd pledge, which should mean you get on the fast track as a first-time pledger. But Mike fell down the back of my couch on that list, which luckily I realised because Mike was very patiently waiting. And when I emailed to say, have you been waiting for quite a while? He said, well, yes, but I didn't want to bother you. You're very busy.
Excellent.
So I appreciate that, Mike. And this should have come up a while ago. But here we go, $6.35 in USD. Fox sake, so it has to be a Leicestershire story, the Foxes, surely. And I thought, a superb double, initially I think county cricket double, the classic double, 1,000 runs, 100 wickets. But when was the last 100-wicket season? Were there a couple in...
I know that Caddy got one in about 2011 or 2012. Andy Caddick towards the very end got a 100-wicket season. Is there
and a couple of those Somerset seasons in like the early 2000s?
Oh, it was still a fairly common occurrence when there were 16-game seasons, because there were 16-game seasons. You might get a tour game, you might get a universities game, and your first class fixture list might read 18,
right,
or something like that, maybe 19 with a couple of universities games. So it was far more likely then. Now, of course, 14 championship games. The university games don't have first class status, and touring games are a thing of the past. Teams don't play counties really anymore at all.
Yeah.
So to that end, I don't think it's really. I mean, it would take an awful lot to do it in 14 games. It would take an extraordinary season. I'm sure it could happen, but I don't know who the last was, but I've got a feeling. Andy Caddick was one of the last in one of these final seasons playing for Somerset.
Yeah, I had a feeling that Mushtaq Ahmed might have done it in those couple of seasons.
Oh, he definitely, Mushy had a 100-wicket season without a doubt, but in an era when there were a few more doing it.
Yeah, but there weren't a lot. I mean, even sort of post-war, really, like kind of end of the 60s, I suppose, the 100-wicket seasons start drying up most of the time. So... I thought, could it be 1,050 wickets as a modern double? So, because I looked at the 1976 season, there were no one was near 100 wickets for the season. The only 1,000-run and 50-wicket players were Imran Khan and Ian Botham. Neither were Leicestershire. So, this wasn't working out. And then I was looking at who was in either category for Leicestershire. So there are only 2,000-run scorers for Leicestershire that season. That's Brian Davison and Chris Balderstone. So they both topped 1,000 runs. Davison didn't bowl that year. Did bowl sometimes, but not that season. Balderstone bowled some left-arm spin and took 30 wickets as well. But so this double wasn't there, but it did get us to Chris Balderstone. And there's something interesting about this guy, which I'll come to in a moment. So he's born in 1940. He's playing for Yorkshire by 20 years of age. He's a top-order bat. He's described as unadventurous, patient and consistent, capable of playing long innings. Okay. Fine. Gets in, does the job, right? Nothing flashy. No 40-minute, 35-minute hundreds or whatever when Chris Balderstone's at the crease. But so he's playing at Yorkshire, but Ray Illingworth likes him so much that in 1971, when Illingworth moves to Leicestershire, he brings Chris Balderstone with him.
I was going to say, now I might be wrong here. You just keep doing your thing for a sec. I've got a feeling we've got a link here. I'm almost certain. Now, let me have a quick. I'm going to do it while we're here. Chris Balderstone, right?
Okay. Yeah, Balderstone.
Yeah. Chris Balderstone was opening in the game I referred to before. He was opening for Leicestershire in the game I referred to before. He made 33 in the first innings. And in the second innings, when Gower took none for 102, after that carnage, that's why the name jumped out, because I read a summary of the game. It said that they realised enough was enough and it was all getting a bit silly with the lob bowling. They brought on Balderstone, who picked up 2 for 10 from 4 overs. He picked up, he got Shaughnessy and Fowler. He bowled Fowler.
Oh.
And then he had Shaughnessy stump. So both batters who made these absurd hundreds, these contrived hundreds,
got
were
out
to Chris Balderstone. One was Shaughnessy was stumped and Foxy was bowled. So there you go. These things frequently get drawn back together.
Good way to take your wickets is like have some sacrificial stuff. Your opponents gorge on that, so by the time you come on to bowl, they're just ready to play a stupid shot and get out.
It has been known for a captain or two to throw the ball around to people who might get people to do exactly that. It wouldn't be without precedent. In more recreational cricket, when if a batter is tearing apart a recognised bowler, almost the best thing you can do is throw on a non-recognised bowler and see what happens.
There you go. And it links back to David Gower, who was in my first answer. So all of the answers today link up in one way or another. So Gower's at Leicestershire, and that's where Balderston is the, the resolute foil, I suppose, to David Gower's flourishing, free-flowing approach.
And by the way, Caddick didn't take 100 wickets in a season at the very end. He did it in 1998, but it was his 1,000th wicket that Caddick was striving for towards the end. I've confused the two milestones. But I am going to, while you do this, I'm going to find out who took the hundreds that happened this century.
I reckon Mushy's the last one. That's my gut. That's not based on any research, but that's just something pings in my head that we've talked about this before, I think. So We've got Chris Balderston. He's gone to Leicestershire with Ray Illingworth. He's not playing a lot. He's playing like 9, 10, 11 games a season. And it's not until his 11th season before he gets big returns with the bat. That's the first season he averages above 40 and the first time he tops 1,000 runs. And he's decently into his 30s by this point. So after this, he goes on to 11 seasons, very nearly 12 seasons, where he makes 1,000 runs after the age of like 32 or 33, which is interesting in itself. He plays until the age of 45. Why is the second half of his career so much more prolific? Because he's also a professional footballer through the first half of his cricket career. So the two cross over. He's a footballer first. He's 17 when he signs up for Huddersfield Town in 1958, plays over 100 games there. At 24, he signs for Carlisle United, which is up in Cumbria, which is almost Scotland. You're so far north at that point. He's a left-footed midfielder, apparently lovely touch, described as a cultured footballer, which meant that they didn't think he was tough enough at Carlisle at first because he didn't go studs up on everybody and Danny Tiato them as often as he could. But he won them over in the end because he had such a nice touch to be able to find teammates around the field as a distributor, the northern distributor, if you will. So for about 15 years, his cricket seasons are like May and June, maybe a little bit of early July. He's basically Father Marriott. He's like popping in when football season's at a low ebb and playing for Leicestershire and then going back to the other game. And Carlisle is they're down the pyramid, but they work their way up and they have, in quite a remarkable story, at the end of the season in 1973, they get promoted to the top division. And it's the last game of the season. They beat Aston Villa like 3-0. They have to wait for other results to come through, and it goes their way, and they go up to the top flight. Bill Shankly describes it as the greatest feat in the history of the game that Carlisle make it into the top flight. They only last one season up there, and they drop back down again, but they've climbed the mountain as a very small club who were not expected to go anywhere near it. So after that season, the season they have in the top flight, when they drop back, Balderston goes to Doncaster Rovers for a couple of seasons, and this is mid-70s, and Leicestershire have also been enjoying a fair bit of success in that time. So they win the Benson and Hedges in 1972, they win the Sunday League in 74, and all of this culminates in them winning their first championship in 1975. Big season for Chris Balderston, makes 1,222 runs, 5 centuries, 43 wickets, big contributor. And he's sort of starting to be able to play a little bit more. And the moment in question, this double, comes during the final game of this season, which, just a mild myth bust here, a fair bit of the reporting I read on this suggested that the season was on the line in this game. I don't think it was. You can tell me if my maths is wrong here, but Leicestershire win the league by 14 points. In that era, a win is worth 10 points. So, and Yorkshire, who come second, win their last game, but they wouldn't have been able to overtake Leicestershire
it would have been to do with the boat of bonus points.
But I don't think they had bonus points at the time, did they?
Oh, I don't know.
Because the table as it stands there is, I think they're 12 wins, 240 points or whatever it is.
Okay. Right.
Or is it 10 points or is it 120? I can't remember. It basically the points tally amounts to the wins, and I think that's it. I think there's no points allocated for draws or losses at that point. So people may be able to correct me, but I think they would have been clear before the last round anyway, even if they dropped this game. But of course, you want to win your last game of the season if you're going to win the championship for the first time. So it's the valedictory lap, basically. They're playing Derbyshire at Chesterfield at Queen's Park. I assume that's where Queen's Park Rangers are from.
No,
Queen's
Park
from somewhere
QPR
else?
are a London team, but Queen's Park, Chesterfield is like the famous Derbyshire outground.
Right.
I've got to come back to an outground thing for you later, actually, Jeff. Something I was going to do early on. I'll do at the end of the show.
Well, Balderston, his first drop, he's out for 6 in the first innings. They get a narrow lead, 15-run lead against Derbyshire. Need to set them a target in the third innings. Wickets are falling around him. Both openers are out cheaply. They're 5 down for 102 when that 5th wicket falls. They get to stumps at 5 for 108. Balderston's still there. So he's 51 not out. They're only about 120 ahead, and they need a score if they want to hope to win this game and finish the season right. It's the end of the second day of a 3-day game at the end of a massive season when they're on the cusp of winning the championship. Big job to do at the last. So what does Chris Balderston do that night? I don't know if he hops a train or if he jumps in the car, but he travels 30 miles away to Doncaster and plays in a 1-1 draw against Brentford, and then hops back on the train, goes back to Chesterfield, gets a night's kip, wakes up the next day, goes to the cricket ground and knocks off his 100, his 5th ton of the season. 116, run out, sets Derbyshire 245 to win, and then helps bowl them out with 3 for 28 to finish the season on a high.
What a way of doing it. The only other comparison I can think of there is when Craig Bradley played I think I'm right in saying he was playing a Shield game at the MCG, and then it was on a Saturday, and he went out to VFL Park to play a pre-season cup game for Carlton. So in the same day he played, I think it's right in saying, I don't think it was a first grade game. I think it was a Shield game because Bradley played for Victoria a couple of times. I reckon it was Shield and pre-season footy, because obviously the two didn't quite cross over due to the ground sharing and that type of thing, as it would in other countries. But yeah, that's still it's unusual and brilliant.
So this is a double. You talk about a rare double. That was rare in itself. He wraps up his pro football essentially by 1976, although he plays at a lower level Scottish team for a couple more years, but is able to play more cricket through that period, through that sort of 75, 76, and then on through the rest of his career, where cricket's able to take up the space that it couldn't before. But he celebrates his retirement from football by getting picked to play for England at the age of 35 in 1976. That's unfortunately for him when they run up against the early, prototype West Indies pace barrage. And it's Michael Holding, Andy Roberts, Wayne Daniel, Van Ben Holder. But he does a job on debut. His first innings, he bats 3.5 hours against the barrage, only makes 35, but he holds them at bay for a decent period of time while England end up making a pretty sizable score at Leeds. And there's a chase that they could maybe get. It's about 250, 260-ish, that chase, and they're kind of going okay at one point, but then fall over and end up losing a game that they might have been able to win. And then he plays one more test at the Oval, but Michael Holding bags him for a pair, which, that can happen if you're facing Michael Holding. England get absolutely annihilated in that game. So you can't really put it down to Chris Balderston. But that's that. He gets those 2 test matches and never gets another opportunity. But plays those 2 tests not long after having retired from football, on the basis of basically a good season and a half. He hadn't done that much in his cricket career before that later point, I suppose, or two good seasons by then. He had 73 and 75, I'd say. So after this test match where he gets rolled into the dirt, and he takes 1 wicket, so at least he gets one in the column for his test career. 10 days later, back for Leicestershire against Sussex, takes a hat-trick. And I was really hoping I could find a football hat-trick for him somewhere so that he could, that would be an even better double, cricket hat-trick and a football hat-trick. But he wasn't much of a goal scorer, as best I can tell. He chipped in here and there, but I don't think he ever rattled off 3 in a game. So that would have been the best double had I been able to find it. But I think it's enough for the answer that he went on to play both forms of sport in a day. I think that's what Mike Kilner is shooting for. And not satisfied with playing until the age of 45, he then goes on to become a first-class umpire. 2 years later, he's standing in first-class cricket as an umpire. From 1988 through to 1999, he umpires 182 first-class games. He's a TV umpire for 4 Test matches and 4 ODIs, and he's out in the middle for 2 ODIs, so umpires international cricket. Obviously, someone who liked to keep himself super busy, which he did right up until the end. So only 6 months after his last first-class match, he dies of cancer at 59. So a shorter life than a lot of people get, but one that packed in a lot more than most, I reckon. The Swiss Army knife cricketer, footballer, Chris Balderston.
Love it. And the fact that he and Shaughnessy both went into first-class umpiring, another tie back to the previous answer, the man he dismissed in 83. And look,
so did Van Holder, who was bowling to him at the Oval.
If you want to go into Leicestershire as well, they confirmed their promotion to Division 1, their first ever promotion to Division 1 yesterday. Finally. It's not confirmed they'll win the comp, but they can't finish any lower than second as of yesterday. So they are going up. They are going up. The last time, the most wickets taken in a season since 2011, David Masters, who was the Essex medium pacer, picked up 93 at 18 in 2011. So you're going to have to go back into the previous decade to find some 100-plus types, but I've ran out of room on my screen. I couldn't be bothered opening any more tabs. I'll level with you. Thank you, Jeff, for that. I'm going to close some tabs while you cue me up for my last answer of this show. Then I can go back downstairs to the girls.
We got one. We've got Harry Woolley. We love a Woolley on this show. Could be Frank. Today, it's Harry. He's coming through in euros. Very fancy. Appreciate that. From the continent. 5 euros and 62 euro cents. 562 is the number. There's an edit and there's no clue attached. So swing away.
Yeah, I think he thought that there was a clue, but by the time that it came to me doing it, he couldn't remember what it was. So that's all good. So thank you, Harry, for that.
We've hit upon the perfect system here by just having the waiting list.
Yeah.
The waiting time extends to the point where people can't remember.
Yeah. So there are some 562s I had a decent run at here. I could have had a decent run at. So one is that Australia defeated England by 562 in the Oval Test match of 1934, which is a test that we've spoken about quite a lot. Of course, Ponsford's final Test match,
yes,
the Ponsford double ton, the Bradman double ton, and the gigantic partnership. But we've done that. It's the second highest victory margin by runs in Test cricket, behind the 675 that England won by at Brisbane in Bradman's debut, though. So that's noteworthy that at the Ekka. So it's the biggest win ever for Australia in Test cricket by runs. If you're wondering, there have been 4 in total above 500. The third highest was only a couple of years ago, and I must admit I didn't even clock it. That was when Bangladesh smashed Afghanistan in 2023, and the other was when Australia defeated South Africa by 530 at Melbourne in 1911. That was Clem Hill's team, and there was a ton there by Warwick Armstrong and the skipper. But 562, I thought I'd have a look at some caps, and it came up with someone who I actually wanted to learn more about. So this was some nice.
Only one team to look at if you're looking at 500s.
Yeah, so 562 England cap number. It was a name that I remembered well as a little boy, but I mean didn't know much more about. So Mark Lathwell was cap 562 and played his Test cricket during the 93 Ashes. And yeah, didn't really nothing else jumps out at me other than the fact that I remembered he played in that series. And in some ways a bloke that kind of sums up where England cricket was in the 90s. So he's born in 1971, Somerset, right-handed player, opener, tall, classy. Played beautifully, by all reports. And it was a county that had just experienced the end of their glory era as he was arriving at the club. You know, no more Viv, no more Joel Garner, no more Botham. You know, that time from the late 70s
to be coming in there so much, so acrimonious.
Yeah. No more Martin Crowe, which ultimately was the player who was kept at Somerset instead of Viv, and then Botham leaves, and what happened there with when Roebuck was captain, and which we've spoken about on Storytime before as well. But anyway, so Lathwell in 1992, when he's 21 years old, has his first proper year in the first team at Somerset, and it's a beautiful season by all reports. He's making these nice, lovely runs with the Ashes looming. And there's this trauma in English cricket after 89. They didn't expect to get walloped the way they did It was chastening, and they were worried in 93 they were going to suffer a similar fate. And look, they were behind 2-0 in the series pretty quickly. We all know what happens with the ball of the century and what happens at Old Trafford, then Lords with Slater and Taylor and so on. And they bring in Lathwell to play the third test match. He's only 22. He's the quintessential pedigree pick rate. He's only played 27 first-class games. So, we make a lot of the new Botham crew cohort, but it was kind of messy for top-order players as well who are making their way in the early 90s. You've spoken about what happened in the mid to late 80s through the Rebel tours and that discombobulation. Well, they were crying out for a hero. They had the captain, Gooch, who handed over the captaincy during that series to the younger man in Atherton who'd started his test career really well, but they really wanted others to emerge and be match winners, and this is what they initially at least thought Lathwell would be. And the first impressions were decent. I mean, it's a limited sample size, but in his first test match up against, I guess it would have been Merv, Rifle and Warne and Tim May, he makes 20 and 33. And look, it's, again, no one's writing a book about the debut of 20 and 33, but he receives rave reviews, and it's all in context. There are some saying he's one of the most exciting. One report described him as the best young player England has seen in years. So I think mostly the aesthetic cut through here, and the hope, the desire, the want for him to be precisely that. He missed out in the next test he played, the fourth of the series, a duck in the first innings and 25 trying to save the game in the second, but they parted ways with him immediately. So he played 2 test matches, got 3 starts, a 20, a 33 and a 25, but such was the volatility of the England team at the time that he was punted. And even though this season went pretty well in 93 for him as a rule, he became a Wisden cricketer in 94. So he's one of the Wisden 5 for what he did in 93. Wisden described him as a major discovery, not since David Gower has a youngster quicken the pulse like Lathwell. So, this guy's got raps. He's got game. He's got a really nice start to his professional career. And sure, he's been dropped as soon as he's been picked. He's only 22, though. He looks the part. It's all kind of lining up for another go at some point. But they don't take him to the Windies that winter. They take him on an A tour to South Africa shortly after that, which doesn't work out. He's back into the county system. In 1994 and 1995, he has 1,000-run seasons and he has moments, but not enough to justify the next big thing tag. And then there's injuries, and then he had a bad injury in 98. By this stage, he's 27. Got back out there, and he was done by the time he was 30. Pulled the pin in 2001. Went back and played a bit of minor counties, a lot of club cricket. There was an interview with him years later, and he's like, that was enough. That was enough for me. He ended up making just short of 9,000 first-class runs, an average in the mid-30s, 12 centuries. List A numbers, not great either. Good, but not great. 5 centuries in the 50-over format of the game. So numerically, he was middling. But, maybe it was a few factors at play here. But maybe it was the hype. Maybe it was the story of the Prodigy and the expectations that go with that. Maybe it was how much people wanted to believe that he was the next big thing. And that can combine for a younger player.
Is that
I don't think he opened in the tests that he played. I can't remember from the card I looked at earlier, but he was certainly in that England top 6. He batted with Graham Thorpe on Thorpe's debut when he went on to make that 100, which was a sign of things to come of a player that did kick on, but Lathwell doesn't kick on, and it is kind of brutal. So
now.
And now,
he did open.
He did open, right? Yeah. So others arrived in similar circumstances through that decade, and there'd occasionally be someone who would say, "Remember that Mark Lathwell, that guy that played those 2 test matches and vanished as soon as he arrived." So maybe there is a little bit of, excuse the the sort of liberties to be taken here, but there might be a bit of Harold Gimblett in this, like another Somerset prodigy who started his career so spectacularly off the back of the lorry and all of that, and played for England and was kind of freaked out by the experience of being an international cricketer, right? We've told the Gimblett story before, who did play for Somerset as well. Maybe their storylines are intertwined to a certain extent. Really a story of what could have been. England cap number 562, though not many people earn them in totality. Not many people have played Test cricket, and he did. And that is my answer for Harry Woolley.
Maybe some Sam Constas vibes around that. Hopefully not.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I guess it could be. Yeah, I can see it. I'm not that I don't think Sam will make it. I think we've seen enough to expect that he probably will. But just trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone at that age, at 22. Like when everyone just wants it to work so badly. They're so invested in you, almost more than you can be possibly invested in yourself. It's different when you come into a successful team and you're the young player and you're batting six and there's a safety net and all that kind of thing. When you're rocking in the middle of an Ashes series, you're 2-0 down, desperately trying to hold on as a team and not get blown out of the water. I think there's mitigation there. And look, as I said before, his numbers afterwards they weren't crazy numbers. So you can maybe he just reverted to what he actually was, which was a middling player, and he looked really good. And when you look really good, sometimes that can get you vault ahead of players who are nuggety.
The Khawaja emergence in 2011, or the Marlon Samuels emergence in 2000. A player who comes out and looks
the part,
elegant, looks serene. Has a sense of timing around them. Yeah, and there's that strangeness as well I always find sport a bit weird in that you've got all of these very adult people, all of these old men essentially standing around looking at what an 18-year-old is doing, or a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old, and getting really invested in this young person doing their thing. For the young person, it must be really weird to have a bunch of 60-year-olds like following every tick of what you do on the field and commenting on it and passing judgment and writing about it.
Imagine you read that line: the best young player England have seen in years. Not since David Gower has a youngster quicken the pulse like
right.
Just sort of trying to take that in. If your personality is not disposed to, if you're not naturally resilient, and who is at 22? Like they're a very small subset of people who can absorb and reflect that kind of pressure at such a young age. That's why oftentimes batters don't really make it in the test game till they're a late 20 or an early 30. Why only the very, very best get there before the age of 25 and make it at that level, because there's so much going on.
You need to have played enough that you stop caring as much in a way. Well, you stop getting so affected by the failures.
Yeah, what was that? I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Sam Perry. If it wasn't, then I'm going to credit it with Sam Perry anyway, describing the frontal cortexing with Constas, like not having a fully developed frontal cortex can actually play in your favour sometimes because you are fearless. Whether there's, I don't know, there's, when you are still of that, that age when things are still being put together in your body and in your brain.
Right.
And for some it works.
Energy.
For some it works and for some it doesn't. It was a brief but sad sort of story in what might have been achieved. But again, I come back to the point I finished on, that not many people get one of those caps, and I hope he takes great pride in the fact that he was seen that way when he was, and he got the chance to take the field with some of the greats of the game.
Not many people make 9,000 first-class runs either, so that's
true.
Nothing to be sneezed at. Right, that is story time. That is us. If you want to send us in a nerd pledge, please do. Patreon.com/thefinalword. Help us get to 974.
Yes, indeed. I just want to round a couple of things off I was going to do in the intro but forgot. One of my best mates, Ben Slater, has told me that he nearly Bannermaned on the weekend. His last game of the season rolled for 106 and he got 69 of them. And he said, he added by saying, take out the 14 extras and I'm there. So I sadly didn't get a chance to take the field with Ben this year. Ben Slater, not the Ben Slater that plays professionally, but the Ben Slater I used to play with at Hampstead. G'day, Slats.
Slater Kinney.
Hopefully see you before I go back to Australia. I'm sure I will. One from last week. We were talking about scorecards last week. Simon Dolding sent a message in, one of our patrons, showing me a handwritten scorecard from when he was 10 years old in front of the television, doing the test match that you were talking about from the 85 Ashes, which is pretty cute. So he remembered that day. So made me wonder whether any of my old scorecards when I was 10 years old in front of the telly exist. I know there's one from the 99 World Cup final, which I periodically have reason to look back at. But I did score games from like 93, 94 onwards off the telly. Cool kid. Yeah. Can't really see Winnie doing that in 3 years' time.
In a shoebox somewhere.
Yeah, hope so. He'll be at the footy next week. And there's the Warwickshire, the Worcestershire sinkhole. It was a sinkhole. The ground last week. Dudley. That was what it was, wasn't it? Dudley. I hope so. Can't remember anymore. I had a number of people send me messages. One of them was Charles Ross. Sorry, Charles, I'm not doing justice to your message. He did send me a long message on Twitter, but basically they rocked up at the ground, so goes the story. This was in 1980 something or another, 1992. And they rocked up and they saw this huge plunge in the middle of the ground, and it was a sinkhole. That's what happened.
Like the whole pitch had gone down it, basically.
Yeah, like the whole the ground, as in the ground had gone into it. Like
the whole ground had gone.
The playing field had a crevice in the middle.
Wowzers.
Yeah, so that's why the pitch had what did we say last week? A 40-foot hole.
40-foot hole. Yes,
that's what it was. It was like literally it was
the pitch
the Mariana Trench.
40-foot hole in it, whereas in fact the pitch was in a 40-foot hole.
Yeah, I'm sort of imagining it like a trench, like
yes,
something like that. Anyway,
so
there
James
you go.
Cameron down there. Get James Cameron in the submersible, not the other guys. Don't call the other submersible company with the PlayStation controller. Didn't work out so well. Who knew? Who knew that the one you built with shit that you got at the hardware store wasn't a great idea?
Last thought, if you listen to the show, tell someone else to listen. I was told recently by a smart person that the best way to get more people listening to the show is ask your audience to forward the episodes to other people who might like cricket. Probably should have done this at the start. Might do it again next week. But if you like story time and you like the final word, take it upon yourself to send the final word to some other people who like cricket and tell them about the show we make. That would be like really nice if we can bring new people into the final word universe as we start another very busy period, beginning with the Women's World Cup in just 17 days from now. And that's story time. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. We'll be with you again in the feed very soon. Jeff's got to answer the door. I've got to go parent. Have nice weekends. Bye.
Bye.